This incident happened in early October of 2015. My wife and I were laying in bed and it was very late. She'd been asleep for quite some time. I was laying on my right side, facing her, and I was having a hell of a time getting comfortable. The house was pretty quiet, so I trained my gaze past my wife's head over to my quail's cage to see if maybe the bird was still awake. The room was light enough to see shapes and the basic outline of everything in my line of sight. We have a street lamp right outside, so some of the light always comes in through the blinds. I could see my bird and she looked asleep. So instead of watching her play in her cage, I decided to renew my efforts at getting comfortable. I went to turn over onto my back, but I'd only turned my body about 20 degrees before I noticed something wasn't right. I don't know how I didn't see it before, but I didn't. I guess I was too focused on the birdcage, and this new thing was just out of my view. Standing over my bed was what I would like to call a person, but it wasn't. It was humanoid-shaped, though. The thing's head was huge, about 3 times bigger than a person's head, and it was shaped like a spoon. Think about how Mr. Burns' head looked on the X-Files episode of The Simpsons, when he was glowing green in the woods. Aside from the head, the thing was bone-thin. It had shoulders only about as wide as an 8-year-old kid's. Its arms were incredibly long, with fingers, only 3 fingers and no thumbs, about 10 inches long. This thing looked like old leather stretched over bones. Except that weird-ass head, which was bulbous. I caught all of these details in a split second. I was so unnerved, it was like time was slowing down to give me time to think. His, and I say that loosely, face was so strange. No nose, a tiny, partially open slit for a mouth. It looked like he had eyes for a second, but they were sticking out of the sockets like snails and they just didn't look solid. Almost like a condensed gas that was taking the shape of eyes. I noticed that he wasn't floating over my bed. I could see that he was bent over me, standing at the foot of my bed, meaning that his body was over 7 feet tall and that his knee bones were bent in the opposite direction as a human's. I don't think that he noticed I was awake yet, but when one of those horrific bone fingers tried to touch my shoulder, I made a noise through my nose. It was like a whimper and a groan at the same time. I couldn't hold it in. I was so disturbed by this. As soon as I made the noise, he pulled his hand away and his fucking eyes melted. They just disappeared into the air and he had these big, empty, burned out eye sockets. Well, needless to say, that was it. I felt like those eyes melting was all I could take, and now that this fucker knew I was awake, I really felt like some harm was about to come to me. So I started swinging, and I was screaming my head off, throwing my hands into the dark. Suddenly, my wife tackles me back down in bed and is restraining my arms and yelling, "Babe, calm down, it's okay." It takes her a minute to get me to stop thrashing, but when I do, there is nothing else in the room except for me, her, and our very confused dogs. Keep in mind, I don't remember the room changing. I don't remember waking up or falling asleep. At this point, I'm shaking, hyperventilating, and my wife is doing her best to get me to tell her what happened. I can't even talk. I'm having a full-blown panic attack. It takes her about 30 minutes to get me calm enough to tell her about what I saw. She insisted that it was just a bad dream, but it felt way different than other sleep paralysis episodes I've had, mainly because I could move the whole time. I don't know when the thing disappeared from the room either. I remember trying to fight it, and I felt like I was about to pass out, but as for the actual scene between being awake and asleep, I can't point it out. She said she woke up from a dead sleep to me screaming like a maniac and trying to punch the shit out of the air above me. I was in hysterics afterward, flipping out and asking her if I went anywhere. And I kept telling her to look and see if they put anything on me. I don't know what the hell I was talking about. And for about a week after this, I felt really uneasy. Background. At the time, I was a 5', 13-year-old girl. I'm 18 now and the same height, with more stories like this. This summer I was in Utah. My dad lives there. This day it was a Friday and I begged my dad to let me go see my friends. He was at work that day. I told him I had money to take the tracks. It's just like the train and the bus, and it was not my first time going on tracks alone. I bought an all-day pass because I wasn't sure if me and my friend would go anywhere again that day. I walked to the track station because it was less than a block away from my dad's house. I was taking tracks from West Valley to Cottonwood Heights. I got on the green, like all the way to Central Point. Nothing weird happened while I was waiting for the train. I got on the blue line heading towards Draper. I took the train to historic Sandy and got off. I was waiting for my bus, F94. Everything happened when I was waiting for my bus. This man comes up to me. It was 7 a.m. and I was not in the mood to talk to anyone, but being polite, I said hi. This man kept asking if I wanted to hang out with hi. I said no, but he kept asking me over and over again. He was asking if I wanted to party, if I wanted to just hang out before my bus came. I kept saying no. I finally texted my dad to tell him what was going on. My dad just said to ignore him and tell the bus driver what was happening. The bus came, and I told the driver what was going on. When the man saw what I did, he ran into the trees by the stop. I found it weird because he ran into a forest-like thing. I took the bus up to Park and Ride, then got on a 2020. All the way to the stop at Pinnacle Highland. Then I walked to my friend's house. I learned not to ride on the bus alone and always try to walk with a friend. To that guy I met at the bus stop, let's not meet again. Please be aware the following story contains themes of rape and abuse. Discretion is advised. So several years ago, I met a pretty, petite, busty young lady named Elena. We had several friends in common, but I met her mostly because her boyfriend, a pretentious wannabe musician named Dominic, worked for me. I managed a restaurant and a bar at the time. I was going on 40, and though she was in her 20s, we vibed right away. She struck me as an old soul who was more interested in what I call real life than most girls her age. She was also into literature, art, culture, etc. Not the Kardashians or dumb pop culture BS. We really had a lot of things in common, but we were both seeing other people, so it stayed a platonic friendship for quite a while. Fast forward a few years. We had developed a friendship built mostly on social media. We never actually hung out or went to the same events, despite our numerous common friends. Since many of them were my employees, I was unable to attend fairly often. But we were Facebook friends, and I followed her extremely engaging Instagram profile. She seemed a sad little rich girl. Her mother is a fairly successful author of a dark magic series of books that deal with the occult and witchcraft. But I don't recall what it was called. Her boyfriend was kind of an idiot, and despite the shiny false surface they both presented on social media, the number of people we knew in common painted a picture of him not treating her very well. She was a full-time nursing student, and her course load kept her at home while her boyfriend was out grinding and hustling, which seemed to mean bartending at different clubs, restaurants, bars, and the like, while putting a ton of effort into becoming famous. She did ballet as a hobby, was well-read, and had a veritable menagerie of animals at her home. She had several dogs of various breeds and ages, cats too. She bred crawfish, and had two pretty distinctive ones. A bright orange one named Cheeto and an albino. She apparently also had a hedgehog, who she often posted pics of on his various adventures in her home. Eventually, by 2012, I was single. The depression was crippling, and she was there for me with compliments and kind words. Then about a month later, she was single too. She had been that way for a week or two when she texted me out of the blue. "When's your next night off? We should hang out." I told her I was off both Wednesday and Thursday. She told me Thursday was better and picked out a cool little place to grab a bite and have some drinks. We would meet there. Thursday came and I was super early. She arrived and I hugged her for the first time. She was tiny, maybe 5'2", around 100 pounds tops. The rumors among our mutual friends was that she was anorexic, or bulimic, or both. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility, though I had my doubts as her chest was abnormally buxom for someone of her stature. We walked in, had drinks, and began to talk as if we'd been friends forever. It wasn't until the appetizers arrived that I realized her ex, Dominic, was the bartender staring daggers at me from behind his bar. She had chosen to come eat here with me only a week or two after they broke up. Red flag? Is she using me? Yes, to both questions. But at the time, my lack of self-esteem and her intoxicating charms made me ignore them. Nothing happened that night. In fact, weeks went by without hearing from her. I heard from friends that she had gotten back together with Dominic, and allowed myself to mourn what could have been before moving on with my life. It was at least a month, maybe two later, when I heard from her again. "I'm gonna get drunk. Wanna come over?" "What about Dominic?" "We broke up a week ago. He was hitting me. I had to draw the line somewhere." "My God, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I just need to talk to somebody. I don't want to be alone right now." "Okay, send me your address." Within minutes, I was in the shower. I was thinking about her pretty face, how nice and natural her small frame felt in my arms when I hugged her. I thought about her body, her scent, her husky smoker's voice. I rubbed one out there and then, thinking about her and what I wanted to happen later if everything went well. I drove to her home. She opened the door and she was wearing only a tiny see-through nightshirt and pajama bottoms. She hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. I could smell on her breath that she had not waited for me to begin drinking. In fact, judging from the empty beer cans on her kitchen table, she was either a slob or had started before she even texted me. Neither concerned me at the minute. I asked where Mr. Hedgehog was. I'd never seen one in real life, after all. Oh, he's dead. What? When? What happened? It's been like a year. He was old. My mind seemed to flip back a few mental pages to about a week ago, when I could swear she posted a picture of her nursing books open, a hedgehog crawling across them, and a caption of, "Silly Mr. Hedgehog is trying to help me study for tomorrow's big test." She opened the fridge, cracked open 2 Lone Stars, handed me one, and walked her cute little ass towards the back door. "Mr. Hedgehog? Mr. Hedgehog who?" We went to the backyard, sat on her patio table, and began to talk. And drink. We talked and drank and drank and talked. About all the things and nothing. But mostly about how Dominic had beaten her, abused her emotionally, and left her scarred. This continued for what seemed like hours, but when I checked my watch, it was only 9:30 p.m. I had only been there for a little more than an hour. Neither of us were drunk, but when talk turned to drinking and driving, she threw out the surprising information that I would be spending the night there, no question about it. Fast forward, I decided it's time to break the seal. I had consumed maybe 6 or 7 beers. It was time. I asked her for the closest bathroom and was directed to the one in her bedroom. I did my business, zipped up, and turned to go back outside. I took a minute to look around her room. I saw prints of dark magic and witch figures rendered artistically and beautifully in about a dozen different sized and shaped frames along the walls. One in particular caught my eye. I knew I had seen it before. It was a dark witch being pulled apart as if by some sort of wind or unseen force, her face contorted in agony. "That's my favorite one," her voice half whispered from behind me. "That's why I got it tattooed right here." Elena was behind me, untying her pajama bottoms. She stepped out of them and stood before me, only thin silk panties and a tiny undershirt on. "See?" She motioned to her left shoulder and back. Indeed, there it was. I knew I had seen it, or rather part of it before, but never this much, as we had never even been alone in the same place together before, let alone had her half naked within arm's reach from me. "Ready for bed?" she asked, indicating the side she had pulled the covers down on. Yes, I was. I won't bore you with the details of the session that took up most of the evening from that point, but suffice to say it was mind-blowingly amazing and erotic in ways I had never experienced. She was insatiable. I thought I had a huge sex drive, but eventually even I could not keep up with her, and I fell asleep. I could not have slept much, and thinking back on it, I don't think she slept at all, as I smelled breakfast cooking upon my sunrise awakening. We had some sort of German pastry thing and some French press coffee. No mention was made of our night of passion. We talked about our day to come, etc. When there was a knock at the door, it was her mother. She was here from Germany to visit for a week. I was incredibly embarrassed at first, not knowing that her mother certainly must know what was going on here. But when Elena introduced me as her friend and mentioned how I had just stopped by for breakfast and had to go, I went with it. When I got home, I had a friend request from her mom. Once accepted, I received one from her older sister. A took this to mean things were going well. I was wrong. Our brief whirlwind of a relationship was now in full swing, and that odd first night together was actually the most normal time we ever had. Within the month, Eleanor revealed to me some trauma from her past. That it wasn't exactly to me, but to some strangers we met, sitting next to us at a wine bar kiosk at a mall, was the least troubling aspect of the tale. What began as a, "Hey, you're a couple, we're a couple, we're all here drinking, let's be friends" conversation, we struck up with a nice 50-something couple, quickly took a turn for the surreal when Eleanor revealed that prior to me, or Dom, or any boyfriend before in America, a man she dated in Germany had been her soulmate. He was perfect, smart, tall, well-built, a successful business owner by the time he was in his mid-20s. Oh, and abusive. She said to this new BFF that she had once been pregnant, and that they were happy and planning marriage, when she found out the sex of the baby and excitedly told this guy. I think she said his name was Eric. Her story was that upon finding out that his firstborn child would be a female, he choked her until she collapsed, then kicked her in the stomach several times before locking her in a bathroom without food or water until she miscarried. She detailed the pain, the suffering, the ache of feeling her lifeless child sliding out of her body. The fear and panic she felt as she lost so much of her precious blood. The sadness as she washed her baby girl off into the sink. Just to look at her before Eric opened the door, took the child from her, and relocked the door. The couple was stunned. I was open-mouthed and silent. Our bartender was wide-eyed and staring. Elena wiped a tear from her eye and began telling us that this was her low point, and that ever since she promised herself she would never be taken advantage of, and she owed it to her daughter, Lily, that she be a success. I tried talking to her about it when we got home, but things she did with her mouth made me focus on other things. The fall was coming, my favorite seasons. We decided to go see a scary movie. I want to say it was Insidious, not sure. I was drinking a lot those days, but it was a movie about a guy who moves into a house where he finds some films in his attic that show the other families that lived there, both in health and eventually murdered. They use triggered nowadays as a flippant term to dismiss people being offended at things. But I have seen Triggered, and trust me, it is no joke. Elena and I were both wasted. We had several big 32-ounce beers, waiting for the movie, and still had the mugs with us as we got to the first part where a child is shown getting killed. Elena flipped. She began to shake. She told me we had to go. Of course, let's go. We got into the hallway outside the theater auditorium. Do you want to leave? No, I'm okay, just give me a second. Lights a cigarette. Babe, I don't think you're supposed to do that in here. Fuck them, nobody cares. Exactly 5 seconds later. Excuse me, miss. Here comes security. I grabbed the cigarette and tried some sleight of hand I know. Cigarette literally burns a hole in my palm as it is extinguished. Security guard literally waves his hand back and forth in front of him to waft away the smoke cloud. Have you been smoking? Me. No, of course not. Why do you ask? Her. Yeah, I smoke, so what? This is America, I have rights. Guard. Ma'am, you can smoke, but not in a public area like a theater. If you want to smoke, you'll have to go outside. Can we take our beers? Guard. No, ma'am, you cannot take alcohol outside our doors. It violates our license. We are on premises consumption only. Her. We paid for these, fascist. Guard. Ma'am, I understand that, but you can't take it outside. You can smoke outside, or you can drink in here, but you can't smoke in here or take your beers outside. Got it? Her. You killed my baby. Oh, shit. Additional security had to be called as she was crying and screaming and generally being a nuisance. And add to this her hair, and she had a tremendous mane of it. Was getting wilder by the minute, and she kinda resembled the girl from The Ring at this point. I know if this doesn't get under control, we are going to be arrested. I didn't want to go to jail. Do something, do something, do something, you drunk idiot, do something. And then she collapsed. She lay still and huddled in the fetal position. The main security guard gave me a sideways glance and cocked his head, indicating her lying there. I didn't waste a second. I scooped her up and made a run for it. I made it across the entire 100 feet to the front gate, and I thought we were home free until I got to the doors. As I stepped from the regulated interior of the theater into the cold autumn night, she sprang to life like a cat who had just had ice water dropped on her back. She resumed her screaming and protesting, demanding her beer back. Security managed to call down a guard who was noticeably pregnant. She talked Elena into being still and quiet. I've no idea what she said to her, though I assume some sort of mother-to-mother, heart-to-heart conversation took place. The first guard advised me to get my car. I obliged. I pulled up in front of the theater. Elena still lay there, looking up with big raccoon eyes from too many tears and too much makeup. But she didn't get up. She just looked at me, and eventually the manager walked up to my passenger side window. I rolled it down. He handed me a refund for our tickets and told me that the lady says she doesn't feel comfortable going home with you. I think my reply was, "Oh yeah," or something equally eloquent. I took the refund and hauled ass out of there. I got a text at 3 a.m. that only said, "Why did you just leave me there?" An average man would have had enough by now, but like I said, I was in a bad place. The perfect storm of loneliness, low self-esteem, a desire to fix this girl who had supposedly been hurt so by others. And amazing sex was just too much. I only stayed mad at her for a few days. The ups and downs continued for the better part of the next 2 to 3 months. It was a week before Thanksgiving 2012 when she invited me over for what would turn out to be the last time we were together, and the last time I ever had a drink. I had accepted her apology and offered up one of my own. I sent her an arrangement of 24 roses and some lilies. Bad mistake. She accused me of trying to be a boyfriend, which I kinda thought I was, but okay. And that I was just sex to her and I better stop trying to be more. I told her that was fine. Act tough, don't let her know you care. And proposed we go get it on right now. She then began to cry, told me she was pregnant, and yelled at me for never using a condom. She asked me how I could just finish inside her all those times without even asking. For the record, the first time we ever got together that happened, and it was totally her choice, so I figured that was okay. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back she was going through my phone. She accused me of talking bad about her behind her back and being an asshole and using her. She started throwing things around. Glass things, wine bottles, ashtrays, my flowers and their vase. She picked up a jagged piece of glass and told me to go so she could just kill herself and keep my seed out of this world. I told her that I wasn't going to let that happen, not on my watch, because I couldn't let that be on my conscience for the rest of my life. She started crying. She begged me to forgive her. She undid my pants and took me into her mouth. She was forgiven. A few minutes later, she stood and said, "Let's get inside, it's cold out here." We made it into the kitchen. "Let's get a beer," she said, as she cracked open the fridge and bent over to get one from the bottom shelf. I couldn't resist that view. So I cupped one of her bare ass cheeks in my hand firmly. She turned and kissed me deeply. We stood there making out for a few minutes. She pulled me down on top of her and opened the bathrobe she was wearing. She guided my head down and I went where she wanted me to go. This was the last good 10 minutes we ever really had. Out of nowhere, she sat bolt upright and asked me who the fuck I thought I was. I was jamming my fingers where I wanted to without asking. Keep in mind that we had been together for like 6 months now. As in any relationship of any sustained length, eventually you figure out what each other like and kind of get a routine down. You do this, I do that, then we do this. This was nothing unusual, I assure you, and something I did pretty much all the time. She then grabbed me by the throat, shoved me naked into the corner of her kitchen. Her eyes were burning with a hate I had never seen before. I stand about 6 feet tall and at the time was a solid 250. I have been in bar fights, car accidents, and played college football. I had been hunting and lost in the woods. I had never in my life been as scared as I was right at that moment. The utter helplessness I felt at that moment is hard to put into words. I was drunk, I was naked. I heard a 100-pound little girl screaming at me. I heard the word rape. My blood ran cold. Who could say I didn't? It's just us here. I am much bigger than she is. Who would buy for a second that I was afraid of her? I can't fight back. I would hurt her even if I didn't mean to. I'm going to sit here and die over a hard-on, here in this kitchen, and nobody is going to save me. I began to wish a responsible adult was present. Then I realized as I saw my life flashing before my eyes that she wasn't talking about me. She was talking about being 13 years old, being an innocent little schoolgirl, being lured over to the popular senior boys' house to hang out and watch movies, and bringing her best friend, a girl only 12 years old. She weeps as she describes being held down by 3 or 4 older boys and being raped in the gravel of their driveway. They each had a turn. The boy whose house it was went first. She described the few hairs on his chin she stared at as he forced himself inside of her and concentrated on the sweat that trickled down his forehead. I was only 13. They said they wanted to be my friend, but all I was a piece of ass. The burning hot tears falling from her eyes onto my chest as she hoarsely croaked this out to me. I was frightened, I was mad, and I was heartbroken all at once. My adrenaline was pumping at previously unknown levels. She let go. She cried. She put her face in my lap and began to idly touch me, almost involuntarily, unimaginably. I was ready. God help me, I was ready. She sat astride me and began the angriest sex you can imagine. I felt the need to make her feel good, to make her happy, to fill whatever hollow spot she had in her soul. She was moaning and screaming and crying and demanding I finish. Now, you always hear about men being raped and you think, bullshit, this can't happen. You can't be hard if you're not into it. Well, I am not going to say I was taken advantage of, but the sheer violence of it, the animality, it's like I wasn't me. Like I was watching a movie. I told her I was close. She looked over her shoulder and demanded, "Give me a child," which wasn't new. She did that often, but this time, as she faced forward again, away from me. And just as the end came, I swear she whispered, "Or bring me your son." When it was over, I held her for a few minutes, until I was sure she was no longer thinking about killing me. The mood seemed to have passed, and we stood together and redressed. I told her I would see her around, and I left. I have not seen her ever since. I got a text the next day that said only, "Don't ever call me again." So I didn't. I did, however, continue to hear about her. One of my female employees was dating a man named Victor, who apparently Elena had been banging for the better part of a year. This guy was a young, good-looking meathead. His girlfriend, my employee, was beautiful. She is currently one of those fitness models who gets paid for their fitness. People used to joke that maybe she cast a spell on him. I, for one, did not take that as a joke. My employee, Katie, went to Elena's house to confront her over the allegations. She took her to the backyard where they could talk. The patio was covered in broken glass and dead flowers. Allegedly, I broke all those things the last time I was there when Elena told me that I was not boyfriend material, and I went berserk. Supposedly her reasoning was, I mean, really, get with him? Please, look at him, like I would ever. Eventually, I met up with this guy Dominic, and over dinner we compared our times with Elena. Apparently, he was not the monster she painted him out to be. He had pictures and texts from her that showed the abuse he had suffered at her hands. She had done to him all the things she did to me, only because of his drug use and possibly due to his upbringing. He fought her back, but as a little fella he took the brunt of those fights. He confirmed to me that during sex she often begged him for a child of her own as well, so it wasn't just me. Her mom and sister apparently got the same story about my jealousy, as they both unfriended me and wrote me very ugly, "I can't believe you would do that, she was your friend, and you should have been happy with that. She can't help if she doesn't have those feelings for you," messages. I tried to defend myself, but as I hit send, I discovered I had been blocked. Same as Instagram. As I posted the innocent question of, "When is this from?" on a ballerina picture she posted of herself. Her explanation of the photo was that she loved ballet, as it helped her deal with the stress of being a full-time student. The problem, in the photo she is wearing a traditional ballet singlet and a tutu, bare arms and shoulders. Elena has, in the 5 years I have known her, always had sleeves of tattoos up both arms and, as described earlier, illustrations of characters from her mom's occult books on her back. The picture must have been at least 5 years old, but as with Mr. Hedgehog, she was acting online as if it was current events. The final straw of my detective work came when I spoke to some girls who went to the nursing school that Elena had been going to, which she talked about often, posting pictures of herself studying for tests at a building I myself had dropped her off and picked her up from when she had clinicals. Elena wasn't a student there. She was a patient. So I was on my way picking my husband up from work. He works at Shamrock Foods. Anyway, the building, although a string of buildings and large, is on a minor street. As I'm waiting for him with a friend of mine who was in the car with me, we decide to get out of the car because there was a lightning storm approaching and we wanted to check out the show. I'm a very observant person, more than most, and for no reason at all, since the streets are very dimly lit, I scoped out the street, both ways. All that's along the street are streetlights and very small bushes. Nothing there. There are no other cars parked along the curb, and there are no Shamrock trucks either. Anyway, as my husband is walking toward the car, we all get in. I'm in the driver's seat, my husband in the passenger, and my friend is in the back behind me. As I'm pulling away from the curb, I check all my mirrors, and then, all of a sudden, in my side mirror, I see a guy stopping suddenly. And my friend straight up says, "What the fuck, did you see that guy?" I did, but the weird part is I didn't see his face. He stopped abruptly as I was pulling away, and the weirder thing is, he had a child's backpack in front of his face. And as I pulled away, he very slowly pulled it down in front of him. I mean, what in the actual fuck? I never saw nor heard anything, no footsteps, no nothing. There were no hiding places. This all happened in the span of 20 to 30 seconds. Scared the living shit out of me. The thing that scared me most was that I was completely oblivious to this. I now stay in the car and lock my doors when I pick up my husband. This is a few stories I have about living in a certain apartment complex. As of writing this, I am 15 years old, and since I have been listening to some of these scary stories, it reminded me of some events that have happened. Since my mom and dad were split up since I was just 2 years old, I went back and forth between living with them. When I was around the age of 10 to 11 or 12, I was living in an apartment complex called Estancias. I lived there with my mom, stepdad, and 3 cats. Now, I should mention that these apartments weren't in the best area of town and were considered pretty ghetto. There have been a lot of messed up stuff related to sex offenders and drug abusers. Now, our apartment had 2 bedrooms and I had my own. Around that time, I was afraid of everything, especially the dark. And just some background before the juicy stuff. A while back before we moved in, and the apartments were in really bad shape, there was a lady who lived there. I was told she was a drug dealer, with an elder son and 2 daughters who stayed in my room. Now I guess the lady was turning in her rent slip in the office. When she came out, there was a former drug customer of hers, and he took out his gun and shot her multiple times. She proceeded to drag herself from the office building to the apartment. She did this all the way and died right in the hallway, and her body was halfway into my room trying to get to her daughters. Now, I don't know all the exact details to that incident. I was only told that story by my mother after she met the girlfriend of that woman's son. She told us the woman's name too, but I forgot. I don't know if this is even a true event, for I haven't found out or seen related documents. Another one of the problems I had living there was the sex offenders. I used to play outside, a lot, I didn't have any real friends when we first moved in, so I would only play with the other kids. Most of them didn't even speak English, but it didn't matter. I remember one day I was just playing outside with those kids. Then a man who looked homeless came outside one of the apartments near us. I noticed him because he was gross looking, and I usually am pretty aware of my surroundings. He usually opened his front door very wide and was sort of standing there, smiling. I don't really remember much about him, but he started saying things towards us. He said something like, "We make cookies, do you smell them? Come inside and we'll eat them together." I don't think any of us went inside, but we did smell freshly made cookies. The reason this bothers me so much now is because a while after that happened, I found out that several sex offenders were kicked out of that apartment for obvious reasons. So the main thing that happened to me while I was living there was something rather paranormal. I've never been one to believe in spirits and whatnot, but after many occurrences, I can't deny what I've seen. So some basic foreground. My room was smaller and had one larger window that was above my bed. My bed was against a wall, and on the other side of the room, I had a sliding door closet. It was one of those closets with a mirror, and it really used to make me uncomfortable. I would close it every night and leave my bedroom door open. I did this because, like I said, I was terrified of the dark. Not only did I make sure my mom and stepdad left the hallway light on every night, but I also had a little nightlight, shaped like a rose on a dresser. My parents' bedroom was right next to mine, and they were usually reliable when it came to my yelling for anything. The bathroom was also right in the hallway that led to my room. Now that this is said, there was one night I remember in particular. So my stepdad's mom, let's call her Lucy, would stay every weekend and would sleep in my room on a couch bed, which was right next to mine. I really liked it when she was there because I felt much safer with another person in the room with me. But she slept with the lights off and the door closed. And this didn't actually bother me much. So, that night we were all going to bed, and my parents were already in their room. Lucy closed the door and got into bed, as did I. She fell asleep before me. I didn't have a phone nor a clock, and even if I did, I can't remember what time it was anyways. The thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was that the door was open. I had no idea why it was open, and I might have assumed that Lucy left it and didn't shut it when she came back. I was really scared because there were no lights on in my apartment, so I was surrounded in darkness, except I felt uneasy that my door was now open. I wasn't able to muster up the courage to close the door, even if it was a few feet away, and I couldn't just fall back to sleep, since my thoughts were now filled with horrors of what might kill me in the night. Lucy was snoring really loud, and that sort of comforted me, knowing she was still there. So I ended up pulling out my DS Lite and playing a Tinkerbell game. And that was the only light I had. My knees were up, and I was under my blanket, and my focus was turned to the light I had in my hands. After playing the game for some time, I felt relieved and fully awake. But then I felt this pressure, almost like a large hand on my calf. For that second, I glanced at my legs, and to my utter shock, I saw my blanket dent in where the hand was. My heart dropped, and I was so paralyzed, I didn't even know if it was still touching my calf. My legs felt tingling and my heart was racing. I sat there not knowing what to do. And eventually I shifted my eyes all around the room. Everything was so dark. Because I had been staring at my DS. Then when my vision came through, my heart dropped into my kidneys. I remember seeing a tall figure right in the doorframe. It wasn't the size of either of my parents, nor did it resemble them in any way. It was so dark looking, but the shape of it looked like a person in a puffy dress. The only thing I can describe it as was a woman in some ball gown. I was so stiff and petrified. This all was so wrong. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me or not, and frankly, I think it had its back to me. I didn't want to make a noise, fearing it would move or jump out at me. I then made the quickest possible choice that made sense in my mind. I leaped out of my bed and straight onto Lucy's. I hit my ankle on the fan right between mine and her beds. I was practically on the edge of the bed, and I curled up right next to her, fearing for my life. I lay there with my eyes closed, and I must have fell asleep after that. I don't know what that thing was in my hallway. I have no idea why it was there, or what it really was. I never saw it again. But I do have a clue about the pressure of the hand on my leg. A story about the woman who died in our apartment. There were many times my family dealt with her. I told my mom about that night, and she had also been touched by a similar thing. So I felt maybe it was the lady, and I wasn't that afraid of her, for her presence felt motherly almost. But I will never forget what I saw that night. The next part to this is about what happened when I was 11. I know this because it happened in 2012, I believe. This is something I guess is a little more identifiable, because the news reported it and everything. It's actually a sad event, and goes to show how messed up the people in our apartment were. It was early April. I don't remember if it was Easter or the day before, because we were dyeing eggs. It was daylight still, around 7 or so. My mom and I were just doing whatever, and I remember washing my hands at the sink, looking out of the window in our kitchen. We heard a loud bang, but it didn't really sound like a real gun or anything. My mom looked at our window as well, and we sort of brushed it off as the neighborhood kids with BB guns. And we even saw children running around too. I don't know how much time passed, but we soon heard and saw police cars driving up into the parking lots. This was pretty common, so we didn't pay it too much attention until we noticed them surrounding the apartments. We had a nosy community, so everyone had come out of their apartments and were trying to talk to the officers. There were cops everywhere, and I was outside with my parents too. A few ambulances rushed up to the scene, but I didn't think it was that serious still. I remember that it was already pretty dark outside, around twilight, and I saw a woman being carried out on a gurney. My mom told me to go back inside, and I did, and my close friend was actually with me. She lived upstairs to us, and her and my parents were outside. I didn't know what was going on until later in that week. What happened was that our neighbors, who were a man, his girlfriend who was pregnant, had gotten into a fight. He pulled out a gun and shot her. I believe he shot her in the stomach. And only 18 years old and 4 months pregnant. He had fled the scene with the gun and was missing. It was a traumatic event for our community, and I remember not everyone wanted to even be interviewed by the news stations that came the next day. Eventually, after it all settled down, most of us just wanted the boyfriend found. He was, after a few months, hiding in Mexico, and I'm glad to know that he is in bars for the murder of 2 lives.
To a city in the mainland UK for university. In order to pay the bills, I needed a job. And it just so happened that a guy I worked with back home was in charge of opening a UK branch of a bar chain that started in Ireland in the same city at the exact same time. He sorted me out with a job right away, and I became the de facto supervisor, manager, when he wasn't around solely because I was the first employee hired. Gradually, we hired a handful of Irish students, and the bar, despite the fact that it had no remotely Irish features, became known as an Irish bar. Can't really blame them, as it had an Irish owner, an Irish supervisor manager, and over half the employees were Irish. Myself and 2 other guys, both English, I'll call them Kevin and Jake, became close and worked the most shifts getting to know the regulars. There were a few creepy, drunken guys or people trying to sneak drugs in the toilets, but nothing worse than what goes on in every bar, club. That was until a certain regular who would usually frequent the place at quiet hours and sit in the many nooks avoiding chit-chat started to make conversation with the workers. Immediately, I understood why he avoided talking to anyone, as he obviously had suffered from some severe trauma to his cheek neck area. He was a slim, unhealthy-looking man in his early 60s with a sunken dent on the right side of his face, and a massive scar running from the corner of his mouth to his temple. His voice was also extremely croaky and deep, and I would have to lean over the counter, putting my ear within centimeters of his mouth to even sort of hear him. I would end up just smiling and nodding like an idiot so as to avoid being rude. The only thing I definitely always made out was Belfast, Armagh, another city in Ireland, and Yellow Dog. I felt sorry for him, but I assumed he had suffered throat cancer or something similar, and always humored him even though he was nearly impossible to hear. I would normally walk the short distance home from work, even though it was through the city centre during the middle of the night. It was nearly always busy, as it was a big student town. I only had one weird experience because of this. When I was stopped by a tall, nervous-looking guy down the one alleyway I had to walk. He asked me for a cigarette, and when I told him I didn't smoke, he noticed my accent and started walking with me and talking about being from Ireland. I was pretty uncomfortable at this point, as it was like 200 yards until I reached the busy high street, where he surely wouldn't try anything, but he kept saying, "My dad's Irish, give me your number and I'll sort you out." Whatever the hell that meant. He kept telling me to get my phone out so I could take his number. It was obvious to me that he just wanted to see if it was worth stealing, so he could mug me. After much insistence that it was okay, he eased off as we neared the high street and said, "I like you, mate. If you ever get in any bother, tell him you're Jameson's cousin." I just mumbled, "Thanks," and figured I was lucky to get out of being mugged. When I mentioned this to Jake, he laughed and told me that I definitely was lucky, as the Jamesons were the main gang in the city. He told me that they were traditionally Irish travelers, but mostly now English, and liked to look after their own. Cool. I was an honorary gang member, I thought, and forgot about it. Months later, we were talking about some of the characters that show up at the bar, and a member of the door staff who was joking around said to me, "I'm surprised you're so friendly with a para." He explained that the scarred regular was a member of the British Army Parachute, Para Regiment, and had served in Ireland. I should now explain why I've mentioned Ireland so much thus far. For people that don't know, there has been plenty of death and heartache in Ireland going back hundreds of years. In 1916, it was split into the bottom 26 counties, known as the Republic of Ireland, independent, and the top 6 counties became Northern Ireland, controlled by the British government. Belfast, where I'm from, is the capital of Northern Ireland and experienced its worst time from the 1960s to 1990s, known as the Troubles. Nationalists, Republicans, wanted a full 32-county United Ireland, were at war with Unionists, Loyalists, who wanted to remain under British rule. It resulted in plenty of death and wrongdoing on both sides. During this time, the British government sent in their army, which only served to escalate tensions, and many atrocities were committed by the British Army against the nationalist Republican side. As a result, there is massive dislike and mistrust of the British Army in this part of the island. Also, people who work in an Irish bar would generally consider themselves nationalist. Not always, but it was true for all the members of staff I worked with. Anyway, sorry if that was too long. I brushed off that bit of info thinking he was a harmless old codger and that I wouldn't let old prejudice get the better of me. The old guy started coming in more and more, always doing the same thing: sit at the bar, order 2 bottles, drink 1, and give the other to whoever served him, then leave after some 90% inaudible chat. I then began to notice he would only ever get a second beer for the English employees. I was being stupid, I told myself. The Troubles were a long time ago, and the majority of people had moved on. But then another Irish employee mentioned it to me. Whatever. Let him hold his prejudice. It was 2013. I wasn't about to let some old secretarian loser get me annoyed. He still talked to me, and I smiled politely and nodded. It wasn't until I started thinking back on it that he was always sneering as he talked to me when he mentioned Ireland. He then began to only talk to Kevin or Jake, both of whom were in the pretty boy mold. Short, slim, good-looking guys in their early 20s, who were chatty and good fun. He would start to stay longer and only talk with them. Often, he would be clearly looking at me and saying stuff, smirking, that I couldn't make him out. When I would ask them what he said, they would just shrug and say, "How the fuck am I meant to know?" and laugh. What really set off alarm bells in my head was when he began to come in for a drink with guys of similar description, and plying them with drinks all night, always young men shorter than him with a slim build. A guy in his 60s buying drinks all night for unassuming young men. I mean, it could be all above board, but it seemed very off to me. My suspicions were confirmed when I was told that while I was back at home for midterm, he had been caught by the bouncers supplying the poor young guy he was in with that night with ecstasy. Hopefully in exchange for just cash, although something told me otherwise. I figured that was the end of it. He'd be in prison, and forgot he even existed until one night. I walked home from work about 3 a.m. and swiped my keycard to get into the grounds of my halls. The gate was electric and took like 5 minutes to slowly close, making it easy for someone without a keycard to sneak in. As I walked the short distance to the actual front door of my halls, I heard quick footsteps and swung around to see the scarred-up, drug-dealing ex-army guy staring right back at me. I was shocked. What the hell am I supposed to do? I was pretty sure I could take him if it came to that, although maybe he would pull some crazy army shit. He just kept staring at me and babbling incoherently. I had no idea what I was supposed to do, and we just stared at each other from a few yards away for what seemed like 20 minutes. Then he began to creep slowly towards me. I wanted to quickly get through the door to my halls, but it was another slow-moving gate and he could follow me through. I was mentally preparing myself to have to get physical with this guy when I desperately remembered my run-in with a gang member. "Listen, mate, I'm a cousin of the Jamesons. Do you want me to get them on the phone?" I blurted out. I was pretty anxious in case he said, "Yes, go ahead. Let them come round." But after a few seconds, his face broke out into a familiar, disgusting smirk that kind of said, "I'm almost certain you're bullshitting me, but I'm not about to risk it." He turned and vaulted the now closed gate with unnerving ease. I didn't see him again for the rest of the year, but found out when I returned in September from the bouncer who caught him with the drugs and had been involved with the prosecution that he was now in prison. He was indeed an ex-British Army soldier who had served in South Armagh, a particularly bad area during the Troubles, for a soldier to be based, with the Yellow Dog Parachute Regiment. He was notorious for preying on young students and supplying them with drugs in return for sex. He also had an intense hatred for Irish people. I'm assuming he had some pretty rough times while serving there, and liked to do the rounds of all the Irish bars taunting their staff. As a result of this, he became an enemy of the Jamesons for years. The creepiest thing from all this is that on thinking back, I'm pretty sure that he was saying some pretty racist, xenophobic things to me every chance he got, but I just nodded like an idiot because I didn't want to be rude. I shudder to think what he was actually saying to Kevin or Jake. So creepy, scarred-up, ex-army, drug-dealing, Ireland-hating sex predator guy. Let's not meet again. But slightly less creepy Jameson gang member. I suppose I owe you a beer. Johnny's Pizzeria is a half block from my house, and Wednesday night is cheapo pizza night. I live alone in an okay neighborhood a few miles outside of a rough but improving city. On many a Wednesday and then Thursday and Friday, I have some pizza. I usually walk to get the pizza, but it was raining this night, so I drove the half block. The only patron in sight, 5'7", dark hair, slight build, American Psycho's Patrick Bateman, without Christian Bale's build or looks. Or personality, I reckoned, as I watched him awkwardly engage an employee. He asked him if he had seen Hateful Eight, with the break in the middle. He asked him a few times about the break, but never using the word intermission, and the employee looked a bit confused. The guy behind the counter said he saw it on a website with no intermission. I thought maybe Mr. Bateman was an old friend of the employee. He said he was moving to LA in June to pursue a career in stand-up. Based on the counter guy's lack of reaction, I didn't think he knew him. I was bemused, but avoided eye contact with Bateman. My desire was for cheese, pepperoni, mushroom, red sauce, and dough, without the crazy. Bateman then bought a $1.63 cookie, and the woman at the till rang him out and told me my pizza was finishing up in the oven. So I sat at the booth nearest the counter, and Law & Order's theme song and title credits blurted out on the sole large TV in the place. Cookie in hand, Bateman sidled up to my booth and said, "You know, these special crime unit cases, they're all anal crimes, like crimes involving people getting anally raped." I was aghast. Fuck. Is this guy's idea of a stand-up routine? It needs some work. Yeah, well, it's the holiest of holes, I guess, I blurted out. In retrospect, I wonder if he got the Tarantino reference. I saw the mental illness in his eyes. Bateman sat, uninvited, at the narrow booth. Our knees knocked. He offered me some of his cookie. No, sir, thank you. I don't want any of your cookie. You bought it. It's yours. I wanted my pizza, goddammit, not a cookie. Bateman stands up and says, "Don't be such a creep. You don't want any of my cookie? That's fine." He then awkwardly staggers around the room, looking for anyone else to engage. The staff are busying themselves. I am his only victim. "So, what is your favorite band?" "Sir, don't take it personally, but I just don't want to talk to you." He hovered around the joint, pacing around. Standing in front of the exit, I thought he was going to stand there to be an obstacle after my food was done, then moving when another patron came in. Apparently, Mr. Bateman ordered a chicken taco, and it arrived. Thankfully, he left to eat it. I kept an eye on the ovens and the parking lot to see where he went to. When my pizza was done, I asked the woman at the till whether she knew him, and told her I was disturbed by my interaction with him. She said no, but said that earlier a man had come in, ate the sugar packets, and bummed the slice from a family eating there. Typical junkie behavior. I said it must be a full moon, and thanked her. I saw that he was at the edge of the parking lot, looking out toward the road, far enough away that I could safely get in my car. I did, and pulled out, and saw him staggering up the sidewalk toward my house. He was looking at the houses along the way when I passed him. He spun around to look at my car. I drove around the block and realized, because I was only going to be out for 5 minutes, and I'd be coming back home with a pizza box in hand, I didn't lock the front door, and I had left my phone at home. When I came back around the block, he was still on the sidewalk near my house. It was raining out. Mr. Bateman was, to all appearances, mentally ill. What if he was looking at the houses to seek shelter? What if he was trying the doors to get in? I went to my cousin's and called the non-emergency line for the police, and gave a description of the man, and asked that they come to my house to make sure it's secure. The dispatcher said at the end of the call, 2 things. 1, always lock your door, even if you're just going to Johnny's. 2, I hope you got the breadsticks, because they're great. I told the officers what happened, and suggested that if he's still in the neighborhood, this might not be the last call they get tonight about him. I'd rather have a torn ego and an intact cornhole than a torn cornhole and an intact ego. What if it hadn't been raining that night, and I had walked? Anal Mr. Bateman? That's not meat. So about a year ago, I was hanging out with my friend Brandon at a park near where he lived around 11:30 at night. We were on one of the dark, winding paths leading into a huge wooded area near his house. We'd sat here in this spot so many times before over the years. We were sitting on a bench that's maybe 300 to 400 yards from the park's open, more public area. Looking at the bench from the trail, I was on the left, closer to the forest, and Brandon on the right, closer to the park. The bench is right next to the trail, like a foot away, and on either side of the trail is decently dense forest, aside from the little bit cut out to fit a bench. It was a summer in Texas, and I felt warm and safe since I'd been here so many times before. But also because Brandon is a 6-foot tall guy and I'm a closer to 5 feet tall girl. We'd been at the park for hours, sitting on the bench, smoking and talking. We had a whole setup of our stuff sitting in between us. 2 pipes, 2 grinders, 2 lighters, 2 backpacks, and other miscellaneous items. I mostly just mean to point out that we were very comfortable where we were, and we had been lounged out in this area for hours, with a lot of personal items lying out. Brandon and I are both significantly baked. At this point in time, I started to discuss with him that I was dealing with some unknown health issues and that my doctors were monitoring my heart rate and had hounded me about keeping it significantly under 140. The atmosphere was steady and calm. As Brandon went to reply, suddenly, we heard a man's very loud, very deep voice. My heart stopped. The air felt so still, and Brandon and I looked at each other, and I felt my heart drop right out of my chest, because the look of fear on his face mirrored mine. The voice of the man wasn't just any level speaking voice. He was yelling a song or a chant. At the point that he began this melodic yelling, we could tell that he was within 50 feet of us, and as Brandon and I turned to where the voice was coming from the right, closer to me, just down the trail deeper into the forest, a figure comes into view. He's about 50 feet away, and all I can see is that he's wearing a white shirt and is closing in on us quickly. Brandon and I turn to each other once more, and he says in a hushed but urgent tone, "We have to go." My body went cold. This whole moment lasted maybe 3 seconds, from the beginning of the chanting to Brandon declaring that we needed to leave. I grabbed everything of mine, not at all concerned with preserving my bud, and shoved it into my bag. I stood up and tried to begin walking as swiftly as possible. All the while, this guy is still chanting and running. Brandon stops me as he doesn't have all of his things back into his bag. The 2 seconds it took him to grab his things felt like minutes. I could see this guy clearly coming towards us, and as soon as Brandon got up, we sprinted with all our power towards the open area of the park. Because of my health issues at the time, I was sluggish and fatigued. I sprinted with all the force in my body, falling behind Brandon. The further I fall behind him, the louder the footsteps behind me become. I can feel this person closing in. I can sense that they are within 15 feet of me. My heart is pounding, and adrenaline makes me feel as if cold blood is pumping through my veins. All I could do is push and try my best to keep up with Brandon, who was clearly trying to hold up so I could catch up, but also obviously didn't want to face whatever was just feet behind us. We never looked back. We ran through the woods, then the park. But still, even as we reached the neighborhood's main road, we could hear his shoes slapping against the pavement just behind us. We continued across the road and into another forest, where we ran until we couldn't. We were pretty sure the guy stopped just at the edge of the main road we crossed, but we ran until we were sure he wouldn't find us again. At this point, we found a new bench to sit at and just tried to rationalize what had just happened. I called my mom to pick me up on our walk back to Brandon's, that we only took once we felt we were safe and unseen. I'm still not totally sure what happened or what was about to happen. We sometimes joke about this man running after us, yelling some earthy song with words of another language. But we both know what happened that night was horrifying and inexplicable.
And there's reality. And for some, there's no dividing line between them. I've been a fan of role-playing games since high school, which was further back than I'd like to think about. Fantasy was pretty much the standard theme of all the games I'd played, and still do play. People like us love to make up stories about our characters, the places they grew up, the towns they live in, to the point where they feel pretty real to us. But we can all agree on one thing. None of it is real. We work our largely mundane jobs and get through the monthly bills like everyone else. We escape every other weekend or so for a night of snacks, friends, geek talk, and telling stories. We play around the kitchen or coffee table, show off our newest additions to our dice collections, and generally break things up before midnight, as we all have to get up in decent time for the next day. My ex and I started a local gaming convention that ran in the local library once a year. It was an excuse to get together for a weekend, try out different games, and meet new players. Some out-of-town vendors would rent a corner and sell products and books we, in those pre-internet days, couldn't easily get hold of. We usually invited a guest of honor too, someone who worked in the industry, who would run some events and generally drum up interest. I met Harold at the second convention we held. He came up to me, loaded down with his gaming paraphernalia, and bluntly asked if he could be the guest of honor next year. He was writing a role-playing game, he said. Now, the writing a game part by itself wasn't that odd. Every gamer who's ever rolled the dice has tried to write their own game at least once. And nerds who have an inflated sense of self-importance aren't that rare either. I said that if the game got published by a big company and it proved popular, we'd talk then. He seemed satisfied with this and moved on. Harold became something of a fixture in the local gaming community. He was a bit socially awkward, but most of us were, had thick glasses, and was a little on the short side. He was far from the worst offender, however. He was at least presentable, washed regularly, and if he did tend to dominate the conversation when he got you cornered, he at least didn't attempt to hit on you. He was, by all accounts, a decent game master. That is, he was good at remembering the rules and setting up a balanced scenario with characters that could battle or think their way out of it. Several of my friends also gamed with him outside of the convention. Harold wasn't my favorite person to deal with, but he wasn't the most dreaded either. He was a nerd, but that I could handle. He was one of those delicate members of the species that we all considered harmless. I was never threatened or afraid of him. There was nothing to be afraid of, other than getting stuck listening to his long-winded gamer stories. Harold worked at a toxic waste handling plant. At the time, this meant basically warehousing dangerous chemicals. Factories would pay the company to take the barrels and crates of the stuff off their hands, and the company would either find creative ways to store it, or break it down into something less terrifying. Harold worked mainly nights, and largely did watchman duties, although sometimes he told stories of having to help move various containers into holding spaces. He'd laugh when he'd tell us how he'd found out later what they'd contained, although he never encountered a bad spill, and was never in any real danger. Some of his friends had seen his pay stubs and noticed that Harold didn't make a vast amount of money. Harold also paid a portion of his wages to his mother, a widow, who I met exactly once. She was a frail thing and walked with a cane, always dressed in black, and looked like she'd been born 85 years old. Like Harold, She'd corner you and pull you into a conversation, telling you all about her dead husband, how she missed him, and how much Harold was like him. For the next 5 years, we saw Harold at the local game and hobby store and at the convention. His life wasn't really going anywhere. Still working at the waste treatment plant, still helping out his mother, still gaming. He flirted at least once with the idea of a girlfriend, but it didn't take. He still met up with his gaming buddies once a week, always at their house. Then one day I was at work. I worked Friday nights at a local comic shop, if you can believe it. Yes, I am that much of a geek. When one of Harold's friends ran in with the news. Harold was in jail. His mother had been calling around to his gaming buds for help, not knowing where else to turn, and not for the reasons you'd suspect. It turns out she was the one who had him up on charges. Harold, it turns out, had beaten her up so severely, she'd ended up in hospital. We found out that Harold had never worked at any plant, toxic waste related or no. He'd forged the pay stubs, or possibly altered stolen ones, and had planted them where his friends would find them. He'd even had work clothes, coveralls, and the like, that he showed up in from time to time when he was on his way to work, that he didn't wear otherwise. Where the hell he went at night is anyone's guess. We lived in a pretty small town, and I never remember seeing him when he was working. He'd been living off his mother for years. She'd owned several rental properties, and the income had somehow fallen into Harold's control. Legally, he didn't own anything. He'd bullied his mother into handing over control of her money. He'd also hit her on many previous occasions. She was afraid of him and had no idea what to do. I know guys tend to protect each other in times like this. I've watched my male friends defend just about anything their other male friends do, sometimes to the point of absurdity. Not in this case. I guess beating up your helpless mom is where they drew the line. When confronted by his buds, Harold strangely said that he needed his stuff at his mom's house moved to a storage locker he'd arranged, probably through his lawyer, but told them to keep any gaming stuff they wanted to. The room was packed with games Harold had never been known to buy. Some of it was still unopened. He'd spent more on gaming materials than we knew of. It's possible, as he had a car, that when he was working, he was actually driving out of town to buy more product he'd shove under his bed or in his closet to never touch. In some cases, there were duplicates of books, games. I'm not sure if he did this intentionally, or if he'd just forgotten what he owned and bought it again. Harold had role-played a mundane life. None of it was true, but all of it had been believable. Why he picked such a boring fantasy life to fake, we'll never know. Maybe he was smart enough to know we wouldn't buy anything grander. Maybe he thought this particular job made him sound macho somehow. I wonder sometimes if Harold's mother also made up a fantasy life. Harold never spoke about his father or his childhood, certainly never to me. Maybe his mom faked widowhood, wearing black to mourn a man who'd left her when she fell pregnant. It wouldn't be unheard of for a gal of her generation. He did a brief stint in jail and then moved out of town. Where he is now, I have no idea. I'm sure wherever he is, He's still living a fantasy life. Harold the role player. Let's not meet. My sister never had great taste in men. And during the autumn of 2012, she started dating a man named Marco. He was her age, 26, and worked as a chef. My sister and I are very much alike, but also each other's opposites. Identical twins, but with two very different sets of personalities. She is trusting and fun-loving, social and bubbly. I'm a total introvert, in love with my books. We are very close, though. Always been, as I assume most twins are. It was when she first brought Marco to a family dinner at my parents' place that I noticed some less than charming cracks in his otherwise well-kept mask. It was subtle at first, but it was there. The signs of a controlling and jealous mind. An ever so brief hint of contempt that dances across his face every time she paid attention to someone else. Or when it became evident that she was much more intelligent and well-read than he. He was very good-looking though, and I'll give him that. And I guess that's the veil that kept my sister from seeing the truth. A wolf in sheep's clothing. He was fit, tall, with broad shoulders and green eyes. A charming smile, and a confident posture. Soon she stopped calling me. She called me on a daily basis before. Then the family dinners thinned out to almost nothing. She started wearing clothes she wouldn't normally pick out herself. I tried talking to her, but at first she wouldn't listen. Because when he wasn't a controlling asshole, he was the love of her life. Yeah, I told you. Psychos are weird like that. Anyway, one afternoon she phoned me up. I was standing in line at the grocery store, but what she told me made me drop everything and rush out to the car. She called me from a cafe, and what she told me was chilling. They had had a fight, a verbal fight, that had escalated until he left their home and slammed the door. Later, he had returned with a new car. He had sold the old two-door thing and bought a larger one, an old Volvo V70. He had stared at her and said, "This car's got a trunk so large that I can easily fit a body in there. Just so you know." At that point, she had gone into the bathroom, started to draw a bath, and climbed out the window. Where I live, this kind of threat isn't taken seriously by the police. If you haven't been hit and got the marks to prove it, you got nothing. So we decided that she would leave town and take that job offer she had been interested in, but turned down because he didn't want her to drive over an hour to work each day. She would go stay with her friend Joe, who lived just under an hour from the new workplace, but 2 hours from her current city. Joe was an old childhood friend and had never been introduced to Marco. It felt safe. I had phone contact with her every day to make sure things were okay. She seemed happy again, and I felt the danger was over. Until that day when I was out running. I had finished my run and returned to the parking lot. I usually hide the car key on top of one of the tires, and as I reached down to grab it, he put his arm around my throat, tight enough to cause breathing difficulties. "One twin is as good as the other," he whispered and started dragging me away from the car. "Your sister caused this. It's her fucking fault. She will never see you again. That's the punishment." He mumbled in my ear as he moved me towards his car. Not the Volvo, but still a car of the right size. I was panicking, and despite my struggling and kicking and desperate squirming, he had no problem keeping his hold on me, and it was terrifying to realize how much stronger he was than I. I'm a fit woman. I run and fence. I have competed in CrossFit, and I did all I could to fend him off, but it didn't help. That's when I used my one free arm to stab the car key in his inner thigh. I aimed for something more painful, but his hold on me made it impossible to move enough. It stunned him enough to loosen his grip a bit, and I used the short window to crush the tiny bones in his foot with my terrain running shoes. He still managed to knock me down, but was then interrupted by a team of cross-country runners, and he fled the scene. My sister came home to witness against him, and she had a lot to say once she started talking. Together, we and the guys from the cross-country running team convinced the court to lock him up. Not for as long as I would have liked, but still. This happened a couple of days ago. For reference, I'm a 17-year-old female in Australia, and I live a half-hour drive out of town. It was about 10:30 p.m., and I had just finished work. I was on the close shift, and it was a Tuesday night, so naturally it was dead and nobody was around. I was driving home alone, and I was stuck behind this four-wheel drive utility thing. Not good with cars, sorry. I needed to get in the next lane. He was indicating, but wasn't actually going anywhere. So I indicated and overtook him into the next lane over. As I was level with him, he began veering towards me, and all I could think was how much it was going to cost to fix that. So I slammed my hand on the horn and made a "the fuck, bro" gesture as I passed him. In an awkward coincidence, the lights turned red, and we stopped side by side. He motioned for me to wind the window down, and I obliged. I was about to apologize, but I didn't even get a word out before he started screaming at me. He called me a cunt, a fucking bitch, and a stupid fucking pea-plater mongrel, and then threatened to ram into my ass on the motorway. I was tired, it was late, and I couldn't be bothered with him. So I just rolled my eyes at him and wound the window back up while he was talking. That royally pissed him off. He turned bright red, and I saw him reach down, and the ute door opened. I panicked and floated through the red light onto the motorway. I thought I was alright for a second, but I saw him in my mirrors, speeding up behind me. He was clearly speeding to catch up to me, since I was going like 10 Ks over the limit. He had his high beams on and kept flashing them. He was right up behind me, and I could only think about what he'd said about crashing into me. So I tried to go a little faster. I was looking for his number plates in the mirror so I could report him, but either the lights were too bright for me to see, or there was nothing there at all. And there was no way in hell I was going to stop after that performance before. I finally got off the motorway. He was still behind me, and I was a little paranoid that he was following me, even though the motorway only really led to the one area. It could still have been a coincidence. So I pulled into the nearest street, and he was still behind me. so I promptly did a U-turn. And when the guy did it as well, I realized he was absolutely following me. I was about 20 minutes away from home at this point, and I didn't want to lead him anywhere near my house. So I decided on a split-second decision to go to the nearest police station to hopefully get him off my ass. Unfortunately, the nearest police station closed at 9:30, and I only ended up pulling into a dark, empty car park. I pulled over facing the entrance so I could see if he had followed me. I didn't see him coming in, thankfully, and I figured he chickened out once he saw the police station. I debated calling the cops since I didn't think I was in any danger anymore. That was until I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, a certain white ute slowly creeping up on my left with its lights off. Once again, I panicked and floored it out of the car park and back towards the main road. I had no idea where I was going, no intention to pull over, and no clue who to call. I was going in the complete opposite direction of my house. I eventually spotted a nice, brightly lit petrol station and pulled in there. Parking as close to the doors as I possibly could, I jumped out, frantically waved my arms around at the doors. They lock them at night and have to be manually opened. When I was let in, I started screaming at the poor lady at the register to lock the doors, and that someone was following me. I was absolutely terrified, but thankfully she was quick in the uptake and locked the doors. I realized I'd left my phone in the car, but she offered to call the police. I was keeping an eye on the road outside while the clerk called the cops. I absolutely saw that car drive past, but he didn't come in. The clerk waited with me for the cops to show up, and eventually they did. It was almost 11 by the time they got there. I had literally never been happier to see a cop car in my life. They asked me to describe the guy in the ute, and asked for the registration. I gave them what I could, and one of them drove me home. I haven't heard any follow-ups from anyone, but it was absolutely terrifying. Enough so that I asked to be taken off night shifts for a while. I've only been driving for a little under a year, but honestly, I don't think anything is going to top that experience. To May 2015. So unfortunately, I was never really close to my grandfather at all. Mostly because when I was a baby, my parents emigrated to the UK, and since I was so young, I hadn't really ever spoken to him. We'd talk over the phone, rarely, and when we did, it was always comforting to know he was alive since he spent the last years of his life feeling poorly. I believe he died in 2010, in April, exactly a month shy of his birthday. At this time, I was still living in the UK. My mom was on the phone with her brother that night, whom was present physically in the same room when my granddad passed back in our home country. It was quite sad, and I remember it like it were yesterday. My family, especially my mom, was very upset and perturbed. She flew back to our home country for the funeral and stayed there a few days. She stayed longer due to the eruption of a volcano in Iceland in the same year that stopped practically all air traffic. So fast forward to the summer of 2014. At this point, my family have already permanently moved back to our home country. My uncle, who is my mom's brother and my grandfather's son, obviously, one day decided he wanted to put something on my granddad's grave. Something other than flowers, since they didn't last long. He went out and bought this white angel and some paints for us to use. Since I'm quite artistic and into that sort of stuff, I agreed to help him. We spent at least 2 days on it, one to paint it, the other to let it dry completely. Both of us really tried hard to make it look good, especially me, since I felt like it would be a way to show that I respected him, despite our very non-acquainted relationship. Once we were satisfied with the results, we went to the graveyard and placed the angel next to his tombstone. Since a bit of the lettering on the actual tombstone was fading, I had also brought along a black paint to fill the words in while we were there. About a week later, it's Sunday, and my uncle goes to church practically every week. That day, after church had finished, he decided he wanted to visit the graveyard to check on our angel. When he arrived, he found it was completely missing. He went around the small graveyard to see if somebody had possibly moved it, but it was nowhere to be seen. When my uncle informed me, I was super angry and sad. I couldn't understand how somebody could be so cruel, stealing something off someone else's grave. It was so disrespectful. I genuinely felt bummed that we put in so much work and effort for somebody else just to grab it and go home. The following week, every time I would leave the house, I'd try and take a peek into other people's gardens to check if it was there. Failed, never found it. We tried to look on the bright side, and we assumed that whoever stole it took it because it looked good, since many other graves also had little statues of angels and ornate candles. Unfortunately, stealing is still a problem in my rather quiet and small neighborhood to this day. Houses are still being robbed, and just last year, somebody had the cheek to steal a gold necklace that was around the neck of Mary Magdalene in our church. Anyway, after 2 weeks, we realized it was definitely not going to show up. I had my own suspicions. There was this old lady in my neighborhood, notorious for being quite the kleptomaniac, and I instantly thought of her. Obviously, I never proved it. Sometime in April 2015, my family were at my grandma's house eating dinner when the doorbell rang. My uncle, as per usual, went to answer it and found that nobody was outside. He got a little angered, thinking that the kids next door were playing stupid pranks on us. The doorbell didn't ring again after. When I later left, it was as I was exiting the house that I realized the angel was outside. It was a little hidden, just to the left of the door, so my uncle probably couldn't see it when he opened it. It was in the exact same condition we left it in, meaning it was probably left indoors. We never found out who put it back, but what was creepy about the situation was that our angel was delivered on the exact date that my grandfather died. We were all very shocked, since we believed somebody was playing a really mean trick on us. We didn't take the angel back to the graveyard, fearing it had been nicked again. But my uncle did tell our priest about it. The priest told my uncle that apparently they had found weird pouches filled with what seemed like herbs and incense scattered around the graveyard. I'd heard of a few rumors that there were old ladies practicing witchcraft in my town, but nobody knew who could be doing such a thing. Portuguese people are quite superstitious, may I mention. When the priest was informed that the angel that was once on my grandfather's grave was oddly returned on the anniversary of his death, he suggested not to keep it in sight, fearing that maybe those witches had something to do with his mysterious disappearance in the first place. My uncle agreed, better safe than sorry, and the angel is currently sitting in my grandma's shed, right at the back. It might seem a bit weird, but for some reason, I always found graveyards intriguing. I hope I don't sound horribly morbid. And when my family would go visit my grandfather, I'd wander off and see practically every tombstone in the place, and really just read people's names, the date they died, etc. I'd also visit my paternal grandparents' graves. One day in May of the same year, when my mum, my dad, and I were at a cafe pretty close to the cemetery, a person they knew arrived and they started chatting, and I found myself bored. My mum realized that it was about 5:10 p.m., so my mum instructed me to place the flowers she had brought on my grandfather's grave, since she and my dad were talking to this guy. The graveyard opens every day at 8 a.m. and closes at 5 p.m. And it is literally 1 minute away from this cafe. So I crossed the road with the flowers in my hand when suddenly, at the entrance, I was able to see that somebody was hunched down close to my grandfather's grave. From afar, I could tell it was an old woman whom I did not recognize, and she seemed to be very enthralled by the sight. So much so, I know that she grabbed one of the wax candles sitting nearby. She didn't notice me at first, since she was quite far, but she soon spotted me, and by the look on her face, she was very frightened. She looked as if she recognized me. Since I had no idea who she could be, and since I also felt a little unsettled by her presence, I ran back to the cafe and told my mum about the woman. At that moment, she was still busy chatting with that friend of hers, and so she did not go straight away. There were 5 minutes left before the cemetery closed when my mum finally decided to come with me to see this supposed unknown woman. Almost coincidentally, the lady was gone. We ventured to the grave and found that the candle I aforementioned was missing. Coincidence? After describing her to my mum, she was sure she had never seen that woman before, and she was most likely to blame for the angel's disappearance, too. To this day, we still have no idea who the woman is, but I've always thought of the possibility that maybe my grandfather had a lover, and since she felt upset or angered that he was married to my grandmother, stealing things off of his grave made her feel better, or allowed her to get revenge. I don't know. But the look on her face still creeps me out. I'm certain she knew who I was. This happened to me back in 2008 when I was 16 years old. I was pretty high at the time, so I could have just been having a bad trip and being paranoid. But I've thought about it a lot, and I feel like I just managed to escape a dangerous situation. I just turned 16, which is kind of a big deal, and instead of being at home celebrating with my friends, I was stuck in a town hundreds of kilometers away from them. It was a beautiful, vibrant town. I just didn't know anyone there, except for Dave. He was 21 years old, and I really did not know him well. I had met him once when he was visiting my hometown. But I was lonely, and as a 16-year-old, spending your birthday alone is literally the worst thing. So I was desperate to have some fun. Dave invited me to go to an overnight trance festival with him and his friends. At first, my mom was completely against the idea, but Dave agreed to meet up with my family, and I pretended to know him a lot better than I really did. He was a very mild-mannered and charming boy, and this, coupled with the fact that my mom felt bad for my 16th birthday being so shitty, was enough to convince my mom to let me go. I was so excited. I was going to my first festival, and with older guys. It was going to be the best birthday ever. The festival was being held in the middle of a wooded area, about an hour's drive away from where I was staying with my parents. This is relevant later. I had never met Dave's friends, but they seemed okay. The one guy made me feel a little uncomfortable. He kept on looking at me like I was food. We will call him Mike, because I don't remember his name. I wasn't going to let that ruin my evening, though. The night started with us smoking some weed, which I was no stranger to. Then they convinced me to snort some MDMA. It was my first time, but I was no stranger to drugs, so I obliged. We then went to the dance floor, and I had a blast. I was way too high to care about anything but the music, and the way it felt to move my body. I started feeling a little overwhelmed being in the thick of it, so I moved off to the side, where I could still hear and dance to the music, but be a bit more chilled. I slowly became aware of a conversation taking place behind me. The voice was saying odd things. Man 1. See that girl? She's one of my girls. She knows how to treat you right. Just see how well she moves. Man 2. She does look good. The first man then goes on to describe all the things his girl can do. Some pretty intense sexual things. I was like, man, this girl sounds hardcore. I even looked around to try and spot her. There were a couple of ladies nearby, but I had no idea of knowing which one it was, so I just carried on dancing. After a while, the first man encouraged the other to go and dance with this girl, and she would give him a taste of what she can do. And to my surprise, this man comes and tries to start dancing with me. I stopped dead, looked at him, and then turned around to see who was calling me his girl. And there's Mike, standing and leering at me. I'm standing there in shock when Dave rushes over, whispers, "We have to go," and pulls me off the dance floor. I go with him, thinking of him as my savior, and he takes me over to some jungle gyms overlooking the festival. I managed to find a comfortable corner of the jungle gym, and was just enjoying the evening air, the fire dancers, and the distant dance floor, when I spot Mike fairly close by in an animated conversation with the guy from earlier. The guy finally hands over some money, and I was just puzzling this over when Dave and his friends come over to the place I was happily ensconced. They surround me and offer me a line of something. I ask what it is, but they don't tell me, so I decline. There are 4 of them standing very close to me, completely trapping me as I have a pole in my back. One is shining a torch in my face, and they will just not take no for an answer. They badgered me for what felt like 10 minutes before I finally gave in. As soon as I take the line, Dave says we should head to the car. I was already way too suspicious to ever want to go to the car. So I asked if I could just go and dance real quick, and then I'd go with them. I ran off to the dance floor, pretending to be excited to get dancing, and pushed my way right into the thick of the crowd. From there, I worked my way to the front and then slipped into the surrounding woods. I hid behind the closest tent and tried to plan out what to do next. When my phone blew up with texts and calls from them asking where I was, I had literally been gone for like 2 minutes. Why were they so worried? I began moving stealthily from one tent to the next, hiding behind trees and being extremely paranoid. As I was switching hiding places, I heard 2 guys approaching, so I dove into some bushes. I had no idea who they were, and I was about to ask them to help me, when I heard the one describing my exact outfit and description to the other. I was so scared. I had never seen those 2 amongst the group I was with. How did they know who I was? And why were they looking for me? I just had no idea what to do. I was scared that if I phoned my mom, I would get into huge trouble, and who knew how long it would take her to get there. I had no idea who to trust and no plan. I just continued moving through the woods, feeling hopeless and terrified, when I spotted a campfire. I ran towards it, and when I emerged, there was a group of about 15 very high-looking hippies, jamming music and having a good time. So I sat with them. They welcomed me warmly and let me sit with them for the remainder of the night. I didn't tell them what was going on. I wasn't sure I believed in myself. After a few hours, Dave finally found me and tried to get me to leave with him. I refused, so we just sat there until sunrise. I called my mom to come and fetch me. I didn't want to call her at an ungodly hour. I went home and never spoke to Dave again. So Dave, Mike, and the rest of your crew, I never ever want to meet you again. Edit. Thank you so much for your kind words. For those of you asking why I didn't report them, I wish I had. Unfortunately, I'd been let down by adults before this, and mostly just blamed myself for what happened. I wish I could report them now, but 1, I don't know their surnames, and 2, I live in a country where the police force is worse than useless. For some background, myself and my significant other are both legally blind. I'm a man and she's a woman. It was New Year's Eve 2014 going to 2015, and we went to a local small town for the evening. We went to dinner. Note, I had no alcohol as I was under 21 at this point. After which we were going to go for a stroll by the seaside on a narrow, somewhat empty beach that goes the length of this town. To get to the beach, you walk right out of the restaurant, go right around the building, then turn left at the next block, and go downhill for about a quarter mile or so. This last stretch is lined with houses, but at this point, all the lights were off, and no one looked to be home in any, or at least not awake. We turned right outside the restaurant, and halfway along the building I noticed footsteps behind us. Typically, this doesn't matter at all. Sometimes other people walk along this stretch, but it's pretty rare. I have no idea why, but these steps just seem to be heavy and out of place. My significant other and I start walking quicker, and I pretend to pop my neck, trying to see if I can see anything behind us. I can't, but I can hear the person is catching up, even though we sped up. At a corner, there are some beautiful floral displays, well lit with special LED lights, and my significant other wants to take a few pictures. Not wanting to alarm her, I don't say anything about the guy, and we stop to snap some pictures. After a moment, the guy catches up to us, and in a very thick London accent, says, "Top of the evening to you." We both get a weird vibe from this guy, and he does seem to be high on something. He doesn't smell of weed or alcohol, so my best guess is mushrooms or something. We talk to him for a minute, then excuse ourselves, and start walking away, still hoping to go to the beach. He notices our canes and says, "My God, are you blind?" Yes, we're visually impaired. One of us, I forget which one, tells him. He sounds like a man that just discovered how to turn water into wine. "My God, I had no idea you two were blind. Are you both blind? How much can you see?" He keeps following us for a block or two, continuing with the questions. He asks where we're from, and we tell him we're locals to the area, which is only partly true, as we're from another local small town near the same big city. We get to a crossroad where we either walk to the beach or walk back to the heart of town. We stop and tell him we're going back to town and we'll see him later. Well, he doesn't want us to go. He tells us that he wants our help, since we must know our way around because we go everywhere from memory. He tells us that his ex-wife lives in town and he needs our help finding her house. And he's pretty sure it's the way we were walking, onto a pretty quiet beach. In his defense, there are houses along the beach, and at the end there is another street, with even more houses. But it didn't seem like he wanted our help. We got the vibe that he wanted us somewhere alone. We ask him where the house is, and he doesn't know the address. He tells us what street he thinks it's on, and we give him crystal clear directions that a 5-year-old could understand. Literally, walk 10 steps forward and turn right. Even numbers on the left, odd numbers on the right. He starts describing the house and says it will be dark, because she's probably asleep. We tell him we can't see the houses, so we can't help. "Well, I'm sure you can help me, let's just try. There's a sign near it about deaf kids or something." Note, I've never heard of deaf people in this town before, and think he may have been just making fun of us at this point. We start walking away and he continues following us until we get to the heart of town, with groups of people everywhere. At which point he finally gives up. So, to the random British stranger wanting to lead 2 blind people into the darkness, alone. Yes, stay away. Stay very, very far away. And like every time, we had our town mascot. You know, that one person everybody knows about. That crazy lady that does loads of meth. Or the creepy drunk that shouts at strangers. Yes, that type of mascot. The guy everyone knew was, in my place, called Johan. Sometimes referred to as Johan the Guitar Man by the locals. He was an average-sized guy with a dark beard and a happy demeanor. And he was very religious, a born-again Christian. He would often be found on street corners, talking in tongues while strumming his guitar. He could also be spotted singing one of his songs while giving his posters, every word of which was in rainbow font, to passers-by, or waving at school children. That, and he'd have maracas he would shake at random intervals. I guess you could say he was some sort of pseudo-street preacher. To most, he was harmless, though there was a lot of stories floating around about Johan. And at school, there would be frequent stranger danger warnings about him. One such story was that he was in a car crash, and he had severe brain damage. Another was that he was initially going to study science at the University of Cambridge, but had a religious experience and gave it all up. By far the worst rumor we heard was that he'd raped some young girl, but was so overwhelmed with guilt by the act, he'd lost his mind and decided to convert. There were also weird things that Johan actually did do. It was his birthday sometime in July, and he'd be giving out invitations in the street to a party he was going to have. I'm afraid I didn't go myself, though I'm curious if people actually did. His apartment, a place above a shop, adorned with the words, "Jesus loves you," painted across the outside wall, was tiny. And he invited a lot of people. The overall local attitude towards Johan was that even though he was nuts, he was more or less harmless. Over the years, I collected numerous amounts of his posters, and he'd pop in occasionally to where I worked, a local shop, and we'd chat. I even got one of his CDs off him. I probably still have it somewhere. Even teachers I knew would put up his posters in classrooms. I vividly remember my English teacher displaying rainbow-colored size 36 words stating, "You're all wonderfully loved." Obviously gifted from Johan. Anyway, back to me. I had many experiences with Johan over the years, and most of them were pleasant. Generally just saying, "Hi Johan," as I passed on my way to work and school and whatnot. To be honest, I did get funny vibes off him, but I decided to ignore them. He actually lived on the same street as me, so we were neighbors, and I was eventually used to his constant appearances. One particular day, however, he greeted me by name. I had never told him my name. "Good morning, my dear sister Hiraki Ghost." I wasn't at all surprised by this. He knew the names of a few of my friends, so perhaps they had told him my name at some point. I greeted him in return and told him I was doing fine. I didn't want to talk for too long, as I had to get to my friend's house, so I tried to keep it short. We talked about something menial, probably the weather. I made my excuses to leave, and he ended the conversation with, "May Jesus shower his ever-flowing love on you. Would you like me to bless you today, Sister Hiraki Ghost?" I thought this was sweet, so I hesitantly agreed, and hey, it would be a funny story to tell my friend, right? This probably wouldn't take too long anyway. Johan proceeded to put down his guitar and roughly grabbed me by the hand, chanting hoarsely in tongues. It hurt. He had scraped my wrist in the process, and it was then I noticed he had grossly long nails. It would be an understatement to say I was a little freaked. The chanting got more intense, and then he suddenly reverted to English. May the love of heaven flow over Hiragi Ghost, her descendants, and all those that care for her. May she find a loving husband to provide for her. May demons be driven from her soul. Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you. Bless her, bless her, bless her. Bless her. Doing all the Jesus loves you and the bless her parts. He was leaping up and down enthusiastically, while still holding my hand tightly, scratching me further. He was excited, laughing maniacally. He then ended the blessing, if you could call it that, with some vicious, high-pitched mouth trumpeting, like he was impersonating a kazoo. If it wasn't totally terrifying, I would have laughed. He eventually let go of my hand. I shakily thanked him and walked away as quickly as possible. Of course, after all that, I made my way to my friend's place and we laughed about it. Although I showed her my hand, wrist, and she was just as freaked out as I was. However, I didn't rule it as intentional harm and we both forgot about it, and did whatever we were going to do that day. Eventually, I left town and went to university, forgetting all about Johan. But then, through a pal on Facebook, a link to the local news was posted. Johan had been arrested, and was to face trials for stalking and sending threatening messages to a girl around my age. It appeared he was angry at the girl for not responding to his advances, after he wanted to be more than just friends with her. And in this town, everyone from around 10 years old and upwards generally had befriended Johan. And the messages became creepily sexual, asking the girl if she wanted a taste of his chocolate cake. He believed the girl was his wife and believed their love was a sign from God, and they were apparently destined to be together. He eventually ended up threatening to kill the girl, her boyfriend, and their families for crimes of adultery. It turns out he was friends with a lot of local gang members, and he was considering sending them to the homes of the girl and her boyfriend. The chilling words on one of his final letters to her said, "God unfortunately says that unless you give up your ways, he will have to execute you. You've seen all the thunder and lightning. Take that as a sign. It would take just one lightning bolt to finish you off, my lovely." What makes it even worse is that the girl used to go to my school, and although it wasn't at the same time, I used to work at the same place as her. In that regard, I questioned the motive behind all of the friendly chats Johan would have with me, and whether he did mean harm behind all the oddly rough hand-grabbing. For the most part, though, I believe that he was a man that needed help, but he was largely ignored due to being harmless. It's a shame myself and my old hometown, including that poor girl, had to find out the hard way. He eventually got detained under the Mental Health Act, and I have to say that I'm relieved for him. Johan, As nice as you were in the past, I hope we don't meet again. When I was in middle school, I met a kid named Rob. He was working with a friend of mine. He was being loud and disrupting the class, which caused the teacher to send him to detention after a few complaints. My friend wound up working with me, and Rob was unable to find a new partner because no one wanted to work with him. The class soon ended, and my friend decided to introduce us. I didn't care for him one way or the other. However, he seemed to latch on to me because I was so accepting of people. Almost all of my friends in middle school would be considered weird or outsiders, so we took who we could get to socialize. Middle school flew by, and I loved to write. Rob complimented me and was always reading what I wrote. In fact, he got in trouble in class because he was reading my work instead of paying attention. To me, it was flattering and an ego boost. I was finally the center of attention for someone. The flattery was something I craved, with me constantly being overshadowed at home and school. Rob and I became friends, but he was very clingy, talking on the phone with me for hours. This was before everyone in school had cell phones, but I'm sure he would be texting me constantly if these things happened today. I still find him annoying, but I like to praise too much to cut it off. In hindsight, I was a bitch to him at first. Then high school came around, and I moved. I lost contact with a lot of friends. Once again, this is before cell phones and Facebook were everywhere. However, those I had the number of, I talked to constantly. I was having trouble making new friends, and it was a new environment. Then I heard that Rob hadn't stopped talking about me, how much he missed me, how depressed he was that I wasn't around, etc. To 14-year-old me, this was almost like a declaration of true love. I was so happy that I was so missed. After all, a guy has to be constantly thinking about the girl he loves, right? We started dating, talking on the phone when we could, saying we were boyfriend and girlfriend, etc. He mentioned that he had started drawing and writing just like me. He kept all the pictures I'd drawn for him, and said his stepmom had stolen some of the writing I had let him borrow to read, and refused to give it back. We maybe saw each other twice during the few months we dated. He had suddenly gotten very touchy-feely, and started showing me written erotica. Being as young and religious as I was appalled. Still 14, and your boyfriend is trying to push you into sex. This grossed me out, and I expressed that it made me uncomfortable. He merely shrugged, and promised not to show it to me again. Then he asked me to hide it because his bitch of a stepmom would take it from him if she found it. I started to get a nervous feeling in my stomach, but I thought it was just a normal problem. I was terrified of talking to my parents because I had been sneaking around to go see him, saying I was going to a friend's house, but he would be there, albeit in a big group of people. I finally decided to break it off. I called his house after a church meeting, and his mother answered in tears. I asked her what was wrong, and she explained that he had been hauled off to a mental hospital. Apparently, as she put it, he had been writing disturbing writing, but she didn't want to talk about it. I decided not to make it worse, and continued to date him until he got back. After that, the calls got more needy, and he would call me all the time. Once he found out about my cell phone. He called me when I was out with friends. When I said I couldn't talk, he'd say, "Okay," I guess I'll go write or something. When I asked to see his writing, he claimed it was embarrassing and wouldn't match up to a pro like me. At this time, the sugar-coated praise had started to annoy me, and I had become self-critical in an attempt to improve. He was still acting like we were in middle school when talking, refusing to move on to different topics. However, I bit my tongue because I was worried of what would happen if I broke it off with him. It all came crashing down one afternoon when I got a call from him. It was almost summertime and we were going to make a plan to go swimming and maybe finally lose it to each other, as he jokingly put it. I had been miserable leading up to it, but I was trying to make him happy. After I hung up, I immediately was called back. I recognized the number as him and wondered what was wrong. "Hello, is this Alice?" A woman answered. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Janice, Rob's stepmother." The stepmother, who he constantly claimed was a bitch, was stealing everything I'd given him, was trying to keep us apart. My teenage stupidity almost made me hang up on her, but then she followed up with, "You need to cut off all contact with Rob. He's dangerous." Dangerous? How? As it turned out, the real reason Rob had gone to the mental hospital wasn't because of depression, but because of how his writing had focused on the two of us. He had planned on killing his family first, then having sex with me, before killing my family, and the two of us running off together. She read a few excerpts from it, which freaked me out. He went into so much gory detail about how he would mutilate the female members of his family. He started to make plans, and had even started hoarding knives in his room. I ran out of my room screaming for my mother, who snatched my phone from me and talked to Janice. They talked for so long. I remember rocking and pacing, white-knuckled as my mother finally hung up. We went to my father's. The two were separated, something Rob and I had bonded over. And he sat me down and had me tell him the whole story. My parents told me I would pick the direction it would go. I didn't want to press charges because Rob was obviously sick. They agreed, but only on the condition that I would give my phone to them if he ever tried to contact me again. I agreed, too scared to think it through. Luckily, once my parents got involved and criminal charges were threatened, Rob backed off. His mother blamed me for everything, accusing me of stealing her son's virginity, despite us never having sex. She then said I was a horrible person for breaking up with him and lying about everything, despite Janice bringing out the evidence. She then tried to blame Janice, and I told her that I never wanted to hear from her again, or I would call the police. Aside from a couple of attempted messages on Facebook, Rob has never contacted me again, and I am thankful to his stepmother for telling me everything. While nothing got much worse, I realized now how many red flags there were. The bottom line, don't stay with someone out of pity. You never know who may be manipulating you. About 5 years ago now, I was feeling a bit lonely. I'm a single mother. I was single then, and still am now. I was just coming off a fairly significant breakup, and after a little time passed, I became open again to the possibility of meeting a new guy. That is when I met Michael. He seemed to have his life together, was decent looking, intelligent and funny. We didn't really have a lot of common interests, but had incredible chemistry. At first, Things seem typical to what the getting to know you stage of a relationship includes. He had a young son. He had a good corporate level job. One small red flag was that he claimed to be divorced. Yet he had a really young son. I always question men who are divorced, but have a 2-year-old baby at home. I know stuff happens, but it just makes me have a flicker of doubt. Still, I painted that red flag green and kept talking to this guy. As time went on, I grew suspicious that he was not divorced, because we never actually went out much, and I had never seen his place. He had only ever come to mine. I questioned him, and he changed his story, saying he was separated and on the way to a divorce. This is a point at which I should have called bullshit, but I didn't. We had started sleeping together at this point, and the sex was phenomenal. It's amazing what a person can overlook if things are great in that department. Over time, though, he started to seem a bit off, texting a zillion times a day, being annoying as hell when I didn't reply right away, sending a lot of inappropriate photos to my phone when I was at work. He also became strangely aggressive sexually, wanting to be rough, in charge, copying things he had undoubtedly seen in porn. He was only 5 or 6 years older than I am, yet he wanted me to call him Daddy. He got upset when I laughed at the ridiculousness of calling someone so close to my age something like that. He began to refer to himself as Daddy in the gazillion messages he sent me. They were always creepily suggestive, and he would text things he would want me to do, and type shit like, "Say okay, Daddy," when I didn't reply because I was busy looking at the messages with a quizzical expression on my face. I ended things when he just got too damn weird for me to deal with. I told him that my best guy friend and I had started dating. Lie. I then did a little bit of the research that I should have done from the beginning. I found out that he had lied about his last name, and had also lied about his imminent divorce. Not only was he still very much married, but his wife was pregnant with twins. In the course of my background checking, I happened to find his mother's blog, where she wrote tons about her entire family, including her son Michael, his beautiful wife, and their children, soon-to-be-born new twins. I felt sick looking at their photos, and I called him out on his shit before stopping all communication. Years have passed. I am still single, but enjoying every minute of it. I'm not the heartbroken and lonely girl in her mid-20s anymore. I'm 31 and honestly, probably a bit more in love with myself. I definitely don't deal with any bullshit like what happened with this guy. About a month ago, I got messages on LinkedIn from Michael saying hello, and that he hoped I was doing well. I didn't reply because I couldn't figure out how to reply in that site, and also because he is not a relevant part of my life anymore. When I didn't reply to his messages on there, he found me on my Facebook and started messaging me on there. I replied after the 5th one to say I am doing great, and that I hoped he and his family were good too. Immediately after replying, I got a text message from him. We exchanged polite but kind awkward messages before he started getting creepy again, saying he still thinks about me a lot, how the sex we had was the best of his life, citing specific instances that he had found so hot. Whereas I did not enjoy sex with him once he hopped aboard the creepy call me daddy train. He wanted to come to my house and roleplay a scenario, and kept sending these weird messages with lots of smileys, trying to pressure me into saying it would be fine for him to come to my house. I told him I wasn't interested and quit replying. That was a couple of weeks ago. And I am still getting the occasional text from him asking if he can please come to my house. Sometimes he tries to word it like he just wants to come up for beers and TV. I don't even drink anymore. He kept saying how we should watch House of Cards and kept referring to it as a devious TV show. Other times he's just gross and explicit as far as what he wants to do. He bitches to me about his wife in texts and does not mention his children in any way. It's like he isn't a father, husband. I have seen photos of his entire family. His wife looks like a very sweet person. Nothing at all like the cold, unloving figure he's tried to color her as. His kids are cute. His whole family looks like they walked out of a Gap ad. It makes me sad that they have a shitbag in their family, and likely will never know it. It is also unnerving how he looks the part of all-American husband and dad. He's the type that no one would ever expect to be cheating on his wife, or wanting very creepy, abusive sex with anyone. He resurfaced about a month ago, and I had to block him from texting me after this weekend. I was at home trying to finish up painting some rooms in my house, and he kept texting wanting to come over to my house. I was somewhat concerned that he might try to drive up here, even though I was ignoring him. And I was thankful that my daughter was away for the night at a friend's. And also, that we now have a big, intimidating sounding dog at our house. So Michael, you fucking adulterous, gross bastard. Let us never cross paths again. I was 14 and in my first year of high school. For a little bit of background, I only went to this high school for my first year due to bullying, as well as my friend that turned into a stalker. Chelsea was a fairly kind, if not a little odd girl. We got along quite well, but I found it weird how clingy she would get, always following me into bathrooms, requesting to the teachers that we would be paired together if there was a class project, and following me around in general. She even gave me a Valentine's Day card because she saw me as her best friend. She would even, at times, refer to me as her second mum. I was okay with all of this. Having been bullied throughout primary school, I just figured I must have been one of the first people she made friends with. But things got worse after the accident. In August, Australian school year goes January through to December. The school day had ended and Chelsea and I were walking towards our usual bus stop. Now this bus stop was across a main road, but was a good 300 meters away from the traffic lights. As we did every other day of the year, we ran across the main road. Except this time, I blacked out and got hit by a car. I was perfectly fine. A few bruises and a grazed elbow. Chelsea was in hysterics though, crying about how I could have died and how she was glad I was okay. I ended up comforting her whilst the ambulance came to check me over. This all happened on a Friday, so I had the weekend to recover. Monday, was when the creepy side of this story began. When I got in, Chelsea was waiting for me at my locker. I greeted her and commented that it looked like she had a rough night. She told me she had trouble sleeping the entire weekend after seeing me get hit by a car. I understood that must have been traumatizing and said something along the lines of, "I'm sorry you had to see that. It must have been awful." She played it off as cool as she was capable of, and then told me she had something for me. She had bought me a present. I told her that was too kind, but accepted it, and thanked her as she looked like she might cry if I didn't. That probably sounds awkward and mildly mean, but I was an awkward 14-year-old with a long history of having no friends, making it hard to react properly to others. This was where things got worse. At recess, Chelsea was going on about the accident and how it looked from her end. I found this interesting because there were details you just don't get when you black out. She then turns to me, pale as a ghost, and says, "I just realized something." "What?" I asked. "If you hadn't blacked, I would have been hit by the car. And if I had been hit by the car, that woman wouldn't have had time to hit the brakes. She would have hit me at full speed, and I could have died." She went silent and stared off into the distance for a while. I agreed it was a scary revelation, and just said, "Well, it is lucky I blacked out then." The rest of the week, Chelsea kept bringing me gifts, either actual store-bought presents or drawings and other things she had made for me. I always thanked her, and after the second day of this, I told her to stop because she really didn't have to do this. After that, the gifts stopped, but that seemed to be what pushed her over the edge. She started following me around more than usual, calling me to find out where I was. She even started abusing the rest of our friendship group when they would have my attention. I tried to be understanding. I tried to help her through what I assumed was a breakdown of sorts. But I drew the line when she attacked my close friend I had from primary school. I wasn't there for this, but Melissa told me that she was walking home from the shops one day when a larger, dark-skinned girl came up to her, screaming at her to keep away from her girlfriend and accused her of being a homewrecker. When Melissa tried to ask what she was on about, Chelsea started to physically assault her, screaming to keep away from me. I knew from the description that it was her. Worried, I contacted Chelsea's mother to let her know what was going on. Unfortunately, her mother more or less had her head up her ass because she said that there was nothing wrong with her little angel, and I must have her confused with someone else. Scared shitless, I decided to confront Chelsea at school. This didn't go in any of the directions I had considered. I thought she would scream, attack, lie, or threaten suicide like she had in the past. But instead, she came clean. The part I remember clearly. She was as calm as Hannibal in the Silence of the Lambs. Me, Chels, why did you beat up my friend? If something is going on, tell me so I can help you. Chelsea. She was getting between us. Don't you understand? I love you, and she was just going to break your heart. I should have killed her. But there were too many people around. Don't you get it? You saved me. So now I'm going to save you from everyone else. I felt pure fear. My stomach dropped, and I went cold. I told her to keep away from me and my friends and to never talk to me again. After this, I reported what I knew to a teacher and spoke to my other friends, warning them of what Chelsea had done. A few people told me that I was being harsh on Chelsea, but I was honestly terrified of her and what she was capable of. My mother, however, told me I had done the right thing and told me not to feel guilty about it at all. Letters started arriving in the mail with no stamp, all of them from Chelsea. Some were photos of me out on the weekend, but most of them were love letters with the threat of suicide chucked in. I handed these into the police, even though they said they couldn't do anything at this time as there was no real threat. It was a good idea to keep a paper trail just in case. Just before December, one of our friends stole Chelsea's diary. I scolded them for this. Just because Chelsea was going crazy on us didn't give them the right to steal from her. But in hindsight, I'm glad they did. The diary was full of our names and hearts, poems about me, drawings of me. Anywhere from just me to me dead, or us doing something sexual. And basic thoughts and feelings about how she felt and what she wanted to do. I felt the blood drain from my face when they showed me her last few entries. All of them were her planning to kill me, on how to dispose of the evidence. Some of the details were enough to make me literally throw up. Thankfully, all three of us were huddled in the bathroom. I am not going to go into those details because they honestly still scare me. Like, I have seen and gone through some awful things, but a lot of it pales in comparison to some of the things she wrote. The other girls just wanted to put it back quietly and act like we never saw it. But I told them we were handing this into the coordinator for our year level. This is what they needed to take action. Chelsea was taken in for questioning and was provided with psychiatric help. The next year I changed schools and changed my number. I haven't heard from Chelsea since. I have, however, heard from my old friends, and they have told me that she never got better and started taking it out on them instead. They got away from her and she dropped out of high school in year 11, 2007. So Chelsea, I hope you get the help you really need. Let's not meet again. This happened to me my freshman year in high school and lasted till last year. Some background information. My parents are divorced, and I lived with both of them at different times in my life. I was living with my father, going to a different school district when this started. I was 14 or 15 and started at a new school. I wasn't too worried as I make friends fairly easily. A week into starting, I had made quite a few new friends and was meeting people through them. No, I wasn't by any means popular, and I was what you would call gothic. A friend of mine was talking to this boy I hadn't met before, so she decided to introduce us. We said our hellos, and my friend and I ended the brief conversation to head to the last class of the day. I started seeing this boy nearly nearly everywhere I was at school. I wrote it off as he just wanted a new friend, so I talked to him. His behavior changed as I got to know him better. He was very touchy-feely, always finding an excuse to hug me, or brush his hands on my arms or hands. I don't want to be rude, so I just ignore him. He started to become possessive of me, and would act passive-aggressive toward anyone I'd be talking to or dating. I decided to confront him when he managed to destroy a relationship I was in, because that was crossing the line. He proceeded to adamantly apologize and say that he was only looking out for my well-being. I told him, well, that's nice of him. I could handle doing that for myself. I didn't hear much from him for a few weeks, until I started getting strange messages from an unknown number. And you guessed it, it was him. I asked how he had gotten my number, why he was sending me pictures of me around town. I didn't appreciate this level of creepy and told him that our friendship was over and that I didn't want to hear from him ever again. The text stopped, and I didn't see him around everywhere, and felt relieved thinking I had ended a bad situation that could have progressively gotten worse. Unfortunately, the peace didn't last long, as I'd see him riding his bike past my house multiple times a day, and even walking up to rocks being thrown at my window. This pissed me off, and I confronted him once again at school. This time he reacted angrily, saying that he loved me and that I had to stop ignoring him. I told him to piss off and leave me alone. The next 2 weeks only got worse, as I got more and more texts containing pictures of me going around town with friends, and even a picture of my boyfriend at the time, and myself walking out of a local cafe, and an angry text accusing me of cheating on him, and other obscene insults. I got manila envelopes filled with angry letters and photos of me in my room. He started showing up everywhere I went, and coming up to me, trying to hug me. I had had enough, and told my dad, providing all the evidence. He didn't take me seriously, and said that I was only trying to get attention. I told him that if he didn't believe me, then I wanted to go back and live with my mother. After a few weeks of arguing and a few court dates, I was placed back into my mom's custody the following year. I believed that the horror I had gone through was finally over. But 6 months later, my happiness vanished, as I got a text containing a picture of me in a local Walmart with friends. I blocked the number, and my life went back to normal for the next few weeks. It's summer at this point, and my friends and I decided to have a picnic at a lake downtown. Everyone decided we wanted ice cream, so I said I'd stay behind with all of our stuff and wait for them to get back. I was all by myself for a good 5 minutes when he walked right up to me and said that he missed me. I stood up and started to walk towards the ice cream shop, and he grabbed my wrists, preventing me from leaving. I screamed and shoved, trying to get away. He was too strong. So I brought my knee up and hit him in the family jewels and took off running. I called the cops and took pictures of the bruises on my wrists. I never came across him in person again, but over the years I would randomly get messages on social media but I just blocked him, and eventually he gave up and left me alone. Creepy stalker boy. Let's not meet. So I'm a 20-year-old male, and I flew to India last November to meet a few family members. It was my first time flying on my own to India, and despite what my family would tell me, I wasn't at all worried, since I can speak and understand Hindi, albeit quite badly. Also, I looked like I could pass for an Indian, which I thought would help me blend in. I landed at around 2 a.m. and after landing in Mumbai International Airport, I had to catch a quick airport coach to take me from the international to the domestic airport. Standard procedure, although I found it a bit strange for such a busy airport to have such a system. I managed to make my way onto the coach. Now I know you must be thinking that the coach must be fake, but it wasn't the coach. I managed to get to the domestic airport just fine, and as I was waiting to disembark, I saw some people dressed in airport gear checking people's boarding passes. So I held my pass to show the guy, and as he looked at it, he gave a perplexed look. He scanned my pass again and stated that my flight wasn't due to depart in 4 hours. This is true, but I thought I'd chill at the airport anyway. He said that I'd have to take a taxi and go back to the international airport, as they would not let me go into the domestic unless the departure was less than 2 hours. I obviously wasn't going to pay for a taxi back to the airport, and didn't understand why the airport wouldn't let me in. However, after thinking about all the weird procedures Indian airports have had so far, I had to collect my bags at Mumbai Airport and check them back in at the same place. Disorganized queuing everywhere, getting a damn coach to and from the same airport, and the dim lights at the domestic terminal. I thought this may be another one of its irritating quirks. I agree with the guy and walked with him to the car park. He was asking me where I was from and what I was doing in India. Just some friendly banter, I thought. But I was too tired and shy to even attempt to speak to him in Hindi. I kept telling him I'm not going for the taxi and that I have no money on me, just to make sure he wasn't trying to scam me. He kept nodding and took me to the taxi he said I should take. Now, from watching Bollywood films, I know how Mumbai taxis look. They're yellow and black, and are a distinctive model. This taxi was a normal silver-colored car, with not even an ounce of credibility to pass as a taxi in Mumbai. Surrounding the taxi were a bunch of eerie-looking guys, all looking at me with a straight face. Feeling a bit awry, I backed away a bit, while they were talking to one another. Thankfully, the guy who had led me to them didn't know I could speak Hindi, and they were saying stuff like, "He's some sweet goods. We'll have fun with him. You brought a good one. I'll be sure not to let him go." Aghast, I started sweating and shaking. I know people back home have said I act a bit camp, and apparently unintentionally act flirtatious, but I had no idea that a bunch of Indian guys would have any interest in me, apart from maybe getting some money. Visibly shaken, I was completely speechless and had no idea how to get out of the situation. The guy had my boarding pass, and the car door was open. Then I had an idea. I said to the guy in English, "Can I just quickly buy a coffee? I've been parched for so long." He stated that the police at the door of the airport wouldn't let me in no matter how much I tried, and the best thing was to get into the car. I insisted that I'd just try to get in as I was really thirsty, and my voice started croaking. Out of fear originally, but thankfully it could be passed as thirst. His friends told him to give me my boarding pass back and let me try it out. He gave it back and made me promise I'd come back after the coffee. I obviously obliged and gave him a cute smile as I snatched the pass and power walked it to the terminal. Of course, I didn't want to act too alarmed, as they could have easily ran up to me and tackled me. In addition, the police could have been in cohorts with them and refused me access. Thank you, Indian News. So I made my way to the terminal and showed the policeman my boarding pass. He had a look, and I asked him if I was allowed to enter the terminal just to make sure. He said, "Of course, your flight departs from here," and directed me to the departures lounge. I've never felt so thankful in my life. I breathed a sigh of relief as I hightailed it up the escalator and past the security check to make sure the gang wouldn't be let in. It was about 4 a.m. at this point, and all I could think of was what would have happened if I couldn't understand Hindi and went into the taxi. To this day, I shudder at the thought. My only regret is not informing the police when I was let in. I think nerves did get the better of me, and I felt distrust towards everyone. Plus, Indian police officers wouldn't have done much to help the situation. Probably would have told me to keep calm and carry on. But yeah, bunch of gang rapists at Mumbai airport. Please, let's not meet.